So my name is Zilin. I'm from the Singapore Economic Development Board. If you don't know us, we're actually the lead economic agency in charge of defining Singapore's economic strategy. We were founded in 1961, 4 years before Singapore became independent. And you can see us as a bit of an architect and designer of Singapore's economy. How do we help companies? We introduce you to potential partners. We have incentives, we have grants. We even invest in startups that are from Series B onwards. But we don't do this on our own. You can see from these 2 days, there's an ecosystem of partners out here in London, helping companies find out more about opportunities in Singapore and Southeast Asia. So reach out to us and reach out to all of our partners here. We're all here to help you find out more about opportunities in an economy that is the 5th largest today, but will be the 4th largest economy in the world in the next 10 years. So I'm going to hand it over to Salvatore, who is from Hawksford, who actually knows Singapore better than me and knows Italy pretty well as well. So if you want to know the best European food and Asian food in Singapore, you got to ask him. But he's not only that, he's an expert consultant, taking care of a lot of business development and sales teams all across Asia. And of course, his focus is on Malaysia and Singapore. So if you have any questions on very technical stuff about how do you actually do market entry, access, or setting up your structure in Singapore while having a good time, Salvatore is the person to ask. All right, over to you, Salvatore.
Thanks, Zillian.
Yep.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Salvatore, and I'm the head of Compass Contact
It's not okay.
Singapore. Some of you might wonder why is an Italian guy here. I mean, in the UK, talking about Singapore. Sorry. I moved to Singapore in 2015, and we started as an Italian company. We were helping European and mainly Italian companies to set up businesses in Southeast Asia. And then we've been acquired by the Hawksford group. So now we are a UK headquartered company. And basically what we do, like if you follow Steve's presentation, Steve mentioned that there are 3 different channels to sell into Southeast Asia. So there is the direct selling, then there is the partnering, and then you can use third agency. So we take care of the first one. So we help companies who want to use direct selling method. Before starting my presentation, let me just spend a couple of words about our company. As I mentioned, we are a UK-based company, but we have a very, very important Asian footprint. So we are about 450 professionals worldwide, and about half of it we are based in Asia. So we have a big office in Singapore of about 90 professionals, and then we have an office in Hong Kong, and then we have 5 offices in China. So let's start about why you should come to Singapore. And like Steve mentioned, if you are not there, and if your competitor are not there, probably your competitor will be there very soon. So the risk of not being in Singapore, I think it's higher than being there. And what we do, what we take care in our company, is that we try to do all of the boring stuff for you so that you can actually focus on developing your business. So we take care of accounting, we take care of tax, HR, payroll, immigration. I'll try to go quickly through all of these things in Singapore and why you should choose Singapore. But the most important reason of why you should choose Singapore is that because Singapore should be considered not as your lending market, but it should be considered as your gateway to ASEAN, the ASEAN region. Singapore is a very small country, but it can give you access to what will be the 4th largest economy in the world. This is what Zillian, Steve already mentioned. So let me go very quickly through my agenda today. I'll try to keep it as short as possible so that I can leave the floor to you to ask me any question. So why you should choose Singapore, how you can use Singapore as a hub for your investment in Southeast Asia. And then we will also talk about how you can actually hire employees in Singapore, whether you want to hire locally or you want to relocate someone from your home country into Singapore. And then we will talk about probably the most, like the best reason why most of the companies choose Singapore, and that is because of a very efficient taxation system. I'll just spend a couple of words talking about IP, because I think it's really important for a tech company that you are operating a safe environment in terms of IP protection. So why Singapore? I think most of these things have already been mentioned by Steve and in the previous presentation, but then of course Singapore offers you the possibility to enter into an area where you can attract foreign talents, and you can also hire locally. That's not always the case in all industries. So there are industries like the tech industries where it's not very easy to hire people locally. And that's why it's important that you can also relocate some of your employee from overseas. And then you will see different measures also used by the Singapore government to try to incentivize and attract new talents. I mean, you can see here there's the tech pass. There is a dedicated pass just to hire talent in the tech industry in Singapore. Of course, Singapore offers a very big and political and economic stability, and that's something not to be taken for granted in Southeast Asia. We have all seen what happened in Hong Kong in the last 3 years. And then, of course, Singapore offers a very efficient tax and investment incentives. There is no capital gains. There is no dividend tax. And then, of course, you will also have access to a lot of double taxation agreements. In this slide, I wanted to show you how you can actually use Singapore in different ways. So as I mentioned, Singapore should not be seen as your lending country, as your lending market, but it should be seen as your gateway to the ASEAN region. And the way you can do that, you can do it 2 ways. You can either, as a foreign investor, set up your own company in Singapore, and then maybe using these companies to deploy capital and set up other subsidiaries across Southeast Asia. Or in case you want to find a partner, instead of finding a partner in a foreign jurisdiction, like for example in Thailand or in Korea or in other countries where it might be very easy to set up an agreement there, you can actually decide to set up your joint venture in Singapore. There is a friendly environment. It's a common law country. So you can actually regulate your joint venture agreement in Singapore and then use the Singapore entity, the Singapore joint venture, to set up your business in another jurisdiction in the ASEAN region. And of course, if you decide to structure your investment this way, you will be able to take advantages of, for example, facility of asset disposal. Let's say you want to do a company in China. If you, after 10 years, you want to sell this company because you want an exit strategy, it's very tough to sell your company while you are in China, because it will take 6 months up to 1 year just to decide to dispose your investment. But if you do, like I mentioned in the second slide, in the right hand of the slide, if you set up your joint venture in Singapore and then you have a subsidiary in China, instead of selling your Chinese subsidiary, you can just sell your Singapore joint venture, and then you will enjoy no capital gain tax, for example. So these are just practical way of why Singapore actually makes sense when you want to structure your investment in the region. So let's go a little bit more in details of how your company can actually enter the Singapore market. And I always say there are 3 ways. To put things in context, we are talking about direct selling. So there are 3 ways that your company can actually enter the Singapore market. And the first one is I'll start from the bottom, is to set up a representative office. That's by far the less, it's inexpensive to set up a representative office. But of course, a representative office will not allow you to conduct any commercial business in Singapore. So why should you set up a representative office? It's just to conduct market research, just to see whether in Singapore there's an appetite for your product, just to see whether there's a gap in the market that you can fill with your product, and you can do so by setting up a representative office rather than setting up your own company there. The second way is to set up a branch office. A branch office is not a separate legal entity. It's just an extension of your British company into Singapore. You can still conduct business there. However, it will not give you access to limited liability. So it means that any obligation that you will actually undertake in Singapore, you will be liable also in your home country. And then the most common way to do business in Singapore is to set up a private limited company. It's very similar to what you have here in the UK. It can be owned by an individual, it can be owned by a company, it can be 100% owned. So unlike other jurisdictions, like for example Indonesia or Thailand, you do not need to have a local partner to set up your own company in Singapore. There is no minimum capital requirement, so you can set up the company just with $1 Singapore, about 50 cents of pound. The only requirement is that you need to have at least one director who is resident in Singapore. Resident in Singapore means a Singaporean, of course. It means someone who is permanently resident in Singapore, but it can also mean one of your employees that you are relocating into Singapore and who is applying for unemployment passes in Singapore. Let's talk quickly about why most of the company decide to move to Singapore, and that's of course because of the tax systems. In terms of corporate income tax, Singapore corporate income tax rate is 17%, but that's just the nominal tax rate. If we actually see the effective tax rate of a company in Singapore, and I will show a little bit more in details in the next slide, the effective tax rate is below 10%. And that's because you're allowed to deduct most of the expenses. For example, entertainment expenses, they are 100% deductible. And more importantly, it's much lower because of the tax incentives given by the Singapore government. And in case, for example, you want to relocate to Singapore, also the individual income tax is one of the lowest in the world. So we have a marginal tax rate system that goes from 0 to 22%, and 22% is only applied to income above roughly 180,000 pounds. So just the portion of income above 180,000 pounds will be taxed at 22%. So for example, to give you an idea, if you want to relocate your a sales manager in Singapore, you are granting a monthly salary of about 5,000 pounds. That's an average salary in Singapore for a salesperson. He will be or she will be taxed at a rate that is between 7 and 9%. I'm Italian, and in Italy our lowest rate is 23%, and then we go up to 41. So you can see it's very convenient to move to Singapore because of tax. In this slide, I just wanted to show you two tax incentives the Singapore government gives to every company that decide to move into Singapore. So if you're moving to Singapore, you're setting up your own company. After you compute your net income, to all company will be given a 75% exemption on the first 10,000 Singapore dollars, on the first 5,000 pounds of net profit, and then an additional 50% of the next 190,000 Singapore dollars, or about 100,000 pounds. So it means that on your first 200,000 Singapore dollar of net profit, you will only pay an effective tax rate of 8%. I will not go more in details in these slides, but please feel free to ask me any questions. Then another important thing is that in Singapore it's quite easy to hire talent locally, but it's also important that you send to Singapore your own person, your own people. You need to be in Singapore. It's very important to be in Singapore, and someone from your home country, I think, should always be there, because you need to build your team, you need to convey the culture of your company. And in order to do so, you will need to do and apply for a visa, of course. We have different kind of visa, but the one that are most used are the employment pass. An employment pass, and Steve briefly mentioned it before in his presentation, it's a visa that it is used for professional. There is a minimum salary requirement of 4,500 Singapore dollar. There is about 2,500 pounds, but this is just the minimum provided by the law. In our experience, and we do thousands of applications, if you want to relocate someone from the UK, you should expect to pay him at least 10 to 12,000 Singapore dollar per month. So about 5 to 6,000 pounds per month. And in Singapore, we always talk about gross salary. So the company does not withhold any tax. It's the employee who is responsible to pay his own taxes. The other visa is the S-Pass. There is one we call for semi-skilled worker. This visa is much more easy to obtain. However, you need to have a certain number of local employees to apply for this visa. And this changes from sector to sector. So in the tech industry, you need to have at least 6 Singaporeans as employee to apply for an S-Pass. And then, of course, once you relocate into Singapore, you can also apply for dependent pass for your family. And unfortunately, before May 2021, dependent pass holders were allowed to work in Singapore. Now that's not the case anymore. So if you are relocating in Singapore, your spouse cannot work in Singapore unless they obtain a separate visa. I'll just finish my presentation quickly, and then hopefully there will be questions. Talking about IP protection, and I think this is really important when you are setting up your business in a foreign jurisdiction and you want to protect your patent, you want to register your trademark. And the message I want to convey is that Singapore is the best legal framework of IP protection in Asia. And it is also home of the only arbitration and mediation center outside Geneva. So it means that if you have any disputes, you can actually solve your disputes in Singapore. And you can be certain of the timing of the resolution of your disputes. Again, this is something that should not be taken for granted. When I started working in Singapore, we started working with fashion company, Italian fashion brands, and we are all aware of all the issues they face, for example, in China, because of IP protection, and how many years it took for them to then resolve all of these disputes. And I'll finish my presentation by leaving the floor to you for any question. Yes?
Currently requires one resident director and a corporate secretary.
Yes.
Corporate secretary, could you explain what that is exactly?
It's very similar to what you have here in the UK. So it's a corporate bodies. So a company secretary is responsible to make sure that all the books are kept in a correct manner. So the company secretary is also the bodies who take care of drafting board of director resolutions, AGM minutes. So it is mandatory in Singapore to appoint a company secretary. There has to be a professional in Singapore. And of course, as a corporate service provider, we provide this service to our client. And the same is for nominee, for resident director. So you need a local director in Singapore, but of course, providers like us, we can actually assist you in appoint someone from our company as your nominee resident director, just to fulfill the regulation of the Singapore government.
And what's the approximate cost of like, if you need to actually get that service for a fee?
So, I mean, for a nominee resident director, it will, let me roughly convert it in pound. It will cost you about £1,500 per year. So it's not that expensive.
For both or for one?
Just for the resident director. And of course, as I mentioned, you can appoint someone of your employee once you decide to relocate, for example, in Singapore. And yes?
For a startup, you told that there are two, there are two ways that motivate startups to set their company in Singapore. First is it can be gateway for Asian market, and the tax incentives, right?
And it takes what?
Tax incentives.
Yes.
I have two questions. Are there any extra, motivation for startups? And the tax incentives were little, complicated. 50%, 85%, and there are some calculations. Can you give some exact example according to income?
Yes, I mean, as I mentioned before, like there is also an exemption just for startup that I did not mention here. So, for example, for a startup, once you compute your profit before taxes, let's say you have on your first 100,000 Singapore dollar of profit, so 50,000 pounds roughly of profit, you will have a 75% exemption, and then on the next 100,000 Singapore dollar of profit, you will have a 50% exemption. So it means that if you have 200,000 Singapore dollar of profit, you will have a tax rate that is lower than 8%. So you will end up paying less than 2,000 Singapore dollar of taxes. Why you want to set up why as a startup you want to choose Singapore? Of course, you don't choose Singapore just because you want to take tax incentives. That doesn't work. You decide to go into Singapore because you think your product has an appetite in Singapore, and more importantly, because of the startup ecosystem that you will find in Singapore. Partner like EDB, for example, can actually help you to point you into the right direction. They can point you toward venture capitalists. They can point you towards accelerator. It depends on the, on the life cycle of your company, on the stage in which your company is. And I think the most important thing is not the tax incentives. Of course, it's very nice to pay very low taxes, but the most important thing is being there, being in this very exciting environment, and be able to grow, and not just in Singapore, but grow in the Southeast Asia region.
I've heard rumors that Singapore is thinking of actually like dropping the requirement for a resident director. Did you know anything about that? Or
Sorry, they are taking what?
I've heard some rumors that Singapore is considering dropping this requirement as it's making like putting like a high barrier into.
No, I mean
market entry.
as of now, there is no indication something like this will happen, because the reason why they want to have a nominee director is because if the owner of the company disappear, they have someone locally who can be responsible for this. So I don't think we're going to go towards an elimination of this requirement. And to be very honest, also, they are becoming more and more strict on who the nominee director of a company should be. So now they will ask you for the CV, they will ask you for the qualification of this person, whether actually, although it's a nominee, can actually take responsibilities for what the company is doing. So you cannot just appoint a random guy crossing the street. You need to appoint someone who can actually take this office of nominee director. Any other question? Right. Yeah.
You mentioned that the office in Singapore should be considered as a path to the Asia market.
Yeah.
Would you then create offices in each country that you want to go to? Or
No, it depends. Again, it depends on where you are in your expansion strategy. So I would say at the beginning, just to have a company in Singapore and then travel around all the countries, it's absolutely more than enough. It's much better to do so rather than doing it from London. It doesn't work anymore. If you want to do business in Asia, like Steve said, you need to meet people, you need to shake hands, you need to go and have dinner with them. So you actually need to have someone locally, and then at the beginning, this person can actually be your area manager for Southeast Asia. And then once you start winning your first, your second, your third deal in a foreign jurisdiction, then you will be required to set up a subsidiary, because to carry out substantial business, for example, in Vietnam, you will need to have a Vietnamese subsidiary. But at the beginning, it wouldn't make sense to set up 10 different subsidiaries. It is not cost effective. It doesn't work. I would say you start with Singapore, and then you try to expand, and then you see whether there are angles and which are the market where you should actually be there with a local presence. For example, you can use Singapore. One of the programs that EDB is running now is called the Singapore Plus One. So we all know that Singapore is not the cheapest country in the world. So let's say you need to manufacture products. So you can actually set up your company and your headquarters in Singapore, and then you set up your manufacturing plant in Malaysia, for example. And then the economic development board, EDB, will actually help you in setting up your plant in Malaysia. So you can actually relocate the CEO of the company to Singapore, and then set up your manufacturing plant 50 kilometers from Singapore in a much, much cheapest place.
Salvatore, just to interrupt, that program is called the Southeast Asia Manufacturing Alliance. Yeah. If you're a company that has presence in Singapore with innovation, headquarter activities, and you want to consider manufacturing nearby, in Malaysia or Iskandar, or nearby Indonesia, you can reach out to anyone with the Singapore badge here, or search online, EDB, Southeast Asia Manufacturing Alliance. You'll get incentives and business support to help you expand from Singapore to the region. Reason being, a lot of our partners are industrial park operators, so it's typically safer to do your business in an industrial park managed by a Singapore player than you just going to the wild and setting up, in the middle of nowhere. So these are some of the ways that we actually help companies with regional level incentives. Yeah, sorry. I think we might have to end the panel. Yeah, I think Salvatore will be here just having coffee with everyone. And if you have any questions, please reach out to him. We wanted to make a statement here at London Tech Week. And the statement is that we wanted to show that emerging technologies are important to Singapore and that we can actually help the community. Right over here are 12 panels of artists from the UK and Singapore. If you do support their NFT art, all of the proceeds will go to disadvantaged charities in UK and Singapore. So we wanted to make a statement that you can actually use technology for good. It just depends on the approach that you're taking. Likewise, if you would like to have a bit of fun, there is a screen right there. Convert yourself into an avatar, hashtag the tag over there on Twitter, and if you are a lucky winner, we'll be giving away a Ledger wallet at the end of the day at 4 p.m. So please enjoy some coffee, talk to Salvatore, and our next panel will start in 15 minutes' time. Thank you. Round of applause for Salvatore.
Thank you, everyone.